So I'm not going to deliver a long political speech. In case you hadn't heard, we've got an interesting format this evening. It's going to be a conversation between me and our guest of honor. So I don't want to delay. I want to get to that pretty quickly. But I do want to just make a few comments, less than 5 minutes, just a little bit about why I'm running for this office. Many of you have heard me speak before, but some of you have not. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. I'm running because Topeka faces a crisis in leadership, and I think that's something that people across the political spectrum could agree on. And there are also several problems in Kansas government that are actually very solvable, but in order to solve them, it will take a governor with political will who's willing to put his head down and push forward as far and as fast as he can. Thank you. And just really briefly, the three issues. Number one, taxation. I think everybody in this room knows that Kansas had a $1.2 billion tax hike at the end of the 2017 legislative session. I think it was outrageous and unnecessary. And now more than ever, we need a governor who's going to stand up and say, this cannot happen again. More than that, we need a governor who will roll back those tax increases and return us to a low-tax state. You know, a year ago, if you'd have been anywhere near the state line and you've been at a dinner where there's, politics involved, you would have had Missourians saying, oh, we need to follow Kansas. We're trying to get our taxes down so all the businesses don't go across the state line to Kansas. And as you all know, that was happening a great deal for the last 5 years or so. Now it's the opposite again. And it's because of the tax hike that did not need to happen. And of course, to add insult to injury, it followed a huge, and I think it was a record-breaking sales tax increase 2 years earlier in the 2015 legislative session. And contrary to what some of the legislators said in 2017, that income tax hike did not need to happen. And I can prove it. In the 2017 debate over the tax increase, there was an amendment that was offered in the Kansas Senate that would have balanced the budget without raising taxes 1 penny. And that amendment only got 12 votes. The other 28 senators decided that it was okay to take the money out of your pocket and my pocket rather than cutting spending. I think that's a huge mistake, and I think the families of Kansas would never run their own budgets that way by saying, if we have a deficit, we're going to take the money from somebody else rather than cutting spending. That needs to change. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating, and that is, Kansas does not have a revenue problem. Kansas has a spending problem. And the only answer when you have a spending problem is to acknowledge that you have the problem and then cut spending. And that's exactly what I tried to do as Secretary of State for the past 7 years in that office. When I took office, I'm a conservative, you all know that, and I'd read all the many writings by famous conservatives over the past many decades saying that, no, government actually can shrink. There's a myth that government has to grow, but it actually can shrink. And I came into office saying, well, I'm going to see if it's true. And so I told my staff, the first year, I want next year's budget to be less than what it is now, not a slower increase. I want fewer dollars spent. And they did it. And I said, okay, next year, I want it cut again. And from every year forward, we're going to spend less than we spent this year, which is not the way government normally operates in Topeka or anywhere in this country. We did it for 7 years in a row. And we went from a $7 million budget to a $4.7 million budget in that period. When I'm governor, we're going to do that to the entire state budget. Issue number two. Part of the reason what goes on in the Capitol in Topeka is so dysfunctional is that there is what I have called a culture of corruption. Now, I pointed this out when I launched my candidacy in June. As you can imagine, some legislators, not the ones here tonight, but some legislators got very defensive. And they said, oh, there's no corruption. And they even said, prove it. They said, we're going to write you a letter, Secretary Kobach, and we're going to ask you to prove it. Well, we waited, and we waited, and we waited until finally, this past week, they finally sent their the Legislative Committee letter demanding me to prove that there's any corruption in Topeka. And so rather than write them a quiet letter back, I decided that I would answer them on the opinion page of the Kansas City Star. And it was in today's Star. I'm not going to recite the whole letter, but I encourage you when you go home, check out the Star, and you'll find an As I See It column where I lay out my case that there is some corruption. I'm not going to repeat it all, but I'll give you a few high points. One is that Kansas is one of very few states in the country where legislators don't record committee votes. Now think about that. Now, where do most bills die? They die in committee. And so you have no way of knowing whether your legislator voted for or against it when they killed it in committee. That's got to change, and that's going to change. We also have a problem in Kansas with some of the way contracts are awarded in a way where friends or associates of the entity or the head of the agency that is issuing the contract somehow mysteriously gets the contract. That's got to change. And we also need term limits in the state of Kansas. And none of this is rocket science. All of these things can be done if you have a governor who's pressing the legislature and going to the people of Kansas and saying, this makes sense, let's do it. And on some of those issues, there's a bipartisan consensus among the people of Kansas. The third issue is illegal immigration. Many of you know I've spent a lot of my career fighting illegal immigration. I advised our guest's father on illegal immigration during the campaign and subsequent to the campaign. But you know, strong borders aren't just essential to our country, they're essential to our state. Because if you enforce our immigration laws, then you will see that there's better public safety and there's better protection for American workers against illegal competition. You know, you don't have to look very, well, you do have to look a long ways, thankfully, but the state that proves this the most is California, right? If you have a state that openly welcomes and rewards illegal immigration, you'll see what happens to the economy. It goes south, and you see what happens to American workers when wages go through the floor. And so I want Kansas to move in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, we have become the sanctuary state of the Midwest. We're the only state in the 5-state area that rewards illegal immigration with in-state tuition for illegal aliens. We're the only state in the 5-state area that does nothing to discourage illegal immigration, like taking away public benefits. And so we have got to change our incentives in the state of Kansas. To quickly list, thank you. And this isn't just sort of a theoretical thing by some lawyer about the rule of law, although the rule of law really is important because, by the way, that's why so many people emigrate to America from their countries, is because of the rule of law. They know if you start a business in Kansas or anywhere in America, the local constable is not going to demand a bribe for you to keep your private property. They know that property rights are secure in this country. They know that their safety is secure because of the rule of law. And unfortunately, it's been deeply undermined in this area. Just what we can do in Kansas, and again, states have to work. And if a state goes the wrong direction, you end up like California. First, we need to stop sanctuary cities and counties. We have 4 sanctuary counties in Kansas. Second, we need to stop giving welfare benefits to illegal aliens. We spend $424 million a year. Third, we need to stop giving in-state tuition to illegal aliens. It's not that hard. Fourth, we need to introduce e-verify requirements like many other states have done to ensure that when people compete for that job, the American worker competes on a level playing field. That's easy too. And finally, we need to ensure that state and local police are free to cooperate with ICE, because I've talked to many police officers who want to do that. We can solve all these problems, but all it takes is leadership and the political will to fight the fight. Not to sit back in the office and just wait and see what the legislature does. It takes political will to lead and tell the legislature, this is what I want to see happen. If you've got other things, go ahead and show me. But this is what the governor's office wants to see happen. And I think we can get all of these things done. So now we get to the fun part of the program, and I want to say a few words of introduction about our guest of honor, my friend Donald Trump Jr. We're going to have a long discussion. I think you're going to enjoy this, but just a few words of introduction. Donald J. Trump Jr. was born on December 31st, 1977 in New York City, so presumably no one ever has an excuse for forgetting your birthday.
Although this year's 40, so I'm going to try to forget this one.
Except for the 40th coming up. He's the oldest, as you probably know, of President Trump's children. He attended the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And after earning his degree in finance and real estate, he moved for a brief period of time to Aspen, Colorado. I'm not going to ask him what happened in Aspen, but he then moved back to New York City, where he returned and joined his dad in 2001 at the Trump Organization. Don Trump Jr. initially helped lead the development of Trump Place, which was a 17-building complex on the west side of Manhattan. He then moved on to other big projects, such as Trump Park Avenue, a conversion of the former Hotel Dominico in Midtown Manhattan, and the Trump International Hotel in Chicago and in Las Vegas. He was named Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization. He was then tasked with new project acquisition and development for properties around the world. In recent years, he's overseen the development of buildings in Mumbai, India, and Vancouver, Canada, and has handled leasing arrangements for Trump Tower and 40 Wall Street in Manhattan. And that's just getting started. He also, as many of you know of this, he appeared as an advisor on his dad's reality TV show, The Apprentice. Might have some questions about that later. After his dad threw his hat into the presidential ring in 2015, Don joined his campaign and was probably the most frequent and battle-weary surrogate out there on the TV shows. Just when they needed somebody to allow the left to pound on, they usually sent Don Jr. And he did a great job in those many, many interviews. He also did a great job at the 2016 Republican National Convention, where if you were watching it or were there, he gave a very well-received speech, very well delivered. And after the victory in the election last November, he joined the transition team for the new administration. In January 2017, the president-elect at that point then announced that he was going to be placing the business into a trust that would be managed by Don Jr. and by his younger brother, Eric. And he now serves in that leadership role in the Trump Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to Kansas, Donald Trump Jr. All right. Thank you, bud. All right. So the way we're going to do this is like it's just a friendly conversation, you and me.
Oh, always friendly.
And 400 of our closest friends.
Exactly.
And a few TV cameras as well. And we're just going to chat about some issues, and then we'll cover some, if we have time, we'll cover some topics from the audience as well. Let me check my watch. All right. So I have a few questions. I have quite a few questions that some might surprise him, but hopefully not too much right off the bat. So let's start with your childhood. What is one of your best memories growing up with your dad?
You know, it was an interesting one because it was probably unconventional. I mean, he was never the kind of let's go play ball in the backyard kind of guy. If you haven't noticed that, perhaps from his personality, he's sort of, he was always very open and welcoming, but we're going to do what he's going to do, and we're happy to tag along. So, I mean, for me, it was incredible because it was just an early intro to business. You know, we sat in, I'd be playing with trucks in his office as he's negotiating business deals and doing these sort of things. So it was sort of an amazing thing. And then, eventually going to work in the business felt so natural because we'd been a part of it for so long. When you're a little kid, most kids are playing with little trucks, and we got to go on job sites and actually experience those things happening. Yeah, and play with real big trucks. So it was fun, but he really, I think, tried to impart a work ethic that is often lacking today. I mean, my brother, myself, my sister, he had us working. I was 13 years old, working away from home during summer vacations as a dock attendant in Atlantic City. I'm probably the only son of a billionaire that's, as I said in my convention speech, I can drive a D10 Caterpillar as well as I can my car because we were actually doing it. Not talking about it in theory, like we hear so many people talking about things in theory, oftentimes in politics. Mm-hmm. I used to joke about our opponent during the general, talking about job creation. I'm like, what jobs has that person ever created?
Right. Well, government will do that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, it was nice to see someone who's actually signed the front of a paycheck, not just the back, for a change.
Very well put. I think all kids at one time or another, especially when you're really young, you think your dad walks on water and your dad is the giant of the family, and then of course you eventually become an adult and you realize that maybe I'll become a father or a mother too.
If my father walked on water, these guys would still say Trump can't swim.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay? that would be the take, right? So,
yeah, that's right. That's right. So, but your father not only was the traditional role of the father who's big and leads the family. Your dad is larger than life to the whole country. He is a true larger than life person.
Yeah, he is.
Before he became president. What was it like growing up with a dad like that?
You know, it was interesting, because he has that persona, but I think he also has a sort of side to him that I coined it originally, and I was often criticized until this last election sort of made it all come to fruition. And I know I'd spoken with Keith about it a bunch. I'd always called him sort of a blue-collar billionaire. So, he has that persona on the side where it's, sort of the lavish lifestyle, but, in the end, he's very much more like, perhaps the people of this state, the hardworking men and women that he really chose to fight for. And while, the irony that the billionaire, brash guy from New York City, end up being sort of a champion of the working class, the irony of that is not lost on me. I sort of get it, because it's the way he was always. He created that persona, but he was always happier, say, going to a ball game. No one knows more about professional sports than him. He'd sit there, he would rather eat a pizza and drink a Coke and watch a ball game than he would sort of lead a lot of the lifestyle that people would imagine he would be doing, and a lot of other people in New York were doing. So it was interesting. So to me, he was always much more of just a normal, hardworking American guy, albeit with a big balance sheet, than anyone would have ever given him credit for. And I think that side really came out twofold. It really came out, obviously, in the campaign. But I think the first inkling of that other people got to see probably was on The Apprentice. Yeah. People would come up to me all the time and be like, your father, I thought it'd be he was thinking exactly what I was thinking. And I think he has that sort of innate ability.
Oh, yeah, he's thinking and he's saying exactly what I'm thinking. And that throughout the campaign.
Yeah. And he's not afraid to say it.
Yeah.
Because that's the other big problem today. I think for him, especially, if we're talking into a room full of conservatives, whether you see it on college campuses, as someone joked about the young gentleman from the college Republicans doing the pledge, and you'd get criticized for that anywhere else now. I mean, it's terrible, you're racist, and I think he's actually given conservatives sort of the ability to actually feel free to speak up again.
Yeah.
Rather than being, rather than being put in a corner and, well, you can have your opinion, but you better keep it to yourself or we're going to attack you. I think it's been a great thing, and I think that's really important because, the notion of, that narrative, the notion of being able to have conversation, I mean, it's all but gone. Certainly in academia where, they're trying to teach you to be free thinkers, but as long as you're only thinking exactly what they tell you to think and anything else is terrible. Yeah. So I think that's really an important movement and an important moment for this country because too much longer and I think that would have been gone forever.
Well, I think one of the reasons your dad is so charismatic, and one of the things I saw early in the campaign is like, no, he can win this thing, and he's going to win a lot of states that people are surprised, is not only does he say what's on his mind and speak from the gut in a way that a lot of people can relate to, he doesn't let anyone polish what he's going to say either. And he also has that sort of Street Fighter way about him.
I had not noticed.
You had not noticed. No, so you have this interesting combination of personality traits. Was he always like that, or is it only?
No, he is. I mean, he's never pulled punches. I always say tough but fair.
Yeah.
Whether that was as a father, whether that was as a boss, whether that was as an employee, employer, as a job creator. I see. So many of the experiences that I got to see in our organization with him as a business guy, whether it be, the guys, again, I keep going back to my sort of convention speech because it was all really from the heart and what I had seen and experienced that I think the rest of the country probably saw. But, he did so much for guys that worked in his organization that no one else in his position would have ever given a chance to. Mm-hmm. Meaning, not someone that had perhaps, the Harvard, Oxford, the guys that, but the guys that were, doormen, but were sort of always went above and beyond, and he'd give them a chance to do the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And all of a sudden, this guy, who anyone else would have likely pigeonholed into this spot forever, would have just overlooked, not because he didn't have potential, but because they would have never given him the chance to explore that potential. He uncovered that, and some of the highest guys up in our organization are those people that had opportunities. Again, if they had any fancy degrees, it wasn't many, and oftentimes not even those advanced degrees, but they did it with hard work, with common sense, with a work ethic, with the street smarts. And I think, that's potential that shouldn't be left behind simply because someone doesn't have XYZ sort of credential behind their academic stuff.
Well, and I think that's amazing. He's a true meritocrat. And one of the things that I personally like, and I've been blessed to have the opportunity to meet with your dad on many occasions. He's the same way off camera as he is on camera.
Yeah, what you see is what you get.
In a meeting of two, he's the same as in a group before 400 people, which is also great because there are a lot of politicians who are not that way, including his opponent in the general election.
Yeah.
He really is. He is what you see. You get
And that's the thing. I mean, he's a funny guy. I mean, if you want to see, comedic excellences, you should film one of our family, Christmas dinner. It's just the ribbing, he doesn't pull punches with us either. Yeah. So it's, it's a lot of fun. I'll say, if we ever started another reality TV show, they should be filming that because, every scene they miss is a huge opportunity lost. And he's got that personality. And I think, people want to criticize him for it and all this, but in the end, I think it's been great for, again, real Americans get it. They see it.
Yeah.
They see that it's humor. And even though, when that gets translated to print with sort of a malicious intent, they try to spin it the other way. I think when people actually see what's going on, they're like, come on, that's pretty funny.
Exactly.
And he's not afraid to show that personality, which I think is also important.
So speaking of your family, your family growing up, you are, like me, the firstborn. A lot of people put a lot of stock and a lot of writing in birth order. What's the relationship with you and your siblings? Are you in those roles, the birth order roles?
I think probably a little bit. I think, maybe I was a little bit more rebellious than the others, and I think because I was the first one, it took a little longer, so that I got to break in my parents for the other ones. I'd like to believe they may have had it a little easier from that sense, but no. What's been great about it is, we've always had a very strong relationship with my siblings. I work great with my brother, my sister. We've been able to stay very tight despite all this. And now it's a little bit harder because we're a little bit geographically different. But for years, you had sort of 3 alpha personalities or officers right next door. You'd think that would be a disaster. And oftentimes in family business, it is. It's very binary. It's either great or it's terrible. There's usually not sort of like, hey, it sort of works. And so we've been very blessed to be able to have that.
That's great. Another similarity that you and I have is we are both the father of 5 children.
Yes, and I learned how that happens recently. So I got a new TV, cable package. I got a new hobby. I think we're good.
I think we're good too. Yeah. The question I have is so when you're a busy person, and you are incredibly busy with with the Trump organization. I'm busy with what I'm doing as Secretary of State, and now a campaign on top of that. So sometimes it's hard to, you got to give that quality time to your kids. One thing I try to do is take them to work with me, take them to campaign events with me. A lot of the people in this room who've seen me at different places around the state have seen me usually with one of my daughters in tow.
That's great.
That's my technique. How do you manage it with 5 kids?
Yeah, I try to balance it. As you know, and how we met through friends sort of from the outdoor world, hunting, fishing, and all that stuff. That's how we met really before the political relationship. And so for me, I try to do that. I expose them to that. We haven't spent a weekend in New York City in probably over a decade. If I have a wedding to go to, we drive in, we go back out to the country, have a cabin up in the Catskills, and so for me, it's about getting them outdoors, experiencing other stuff. So, I just got back from Montana. I took my, 2 of my sons out there over the weekend after Thanksgiving to go out there and do a little bit of hunting. And it's just about you got to put in the time. It's not so easy, but you got to make it. And if you don't, the ramifications of that, I think, are pretty severe. So, like anything else, there'll be plenty of time to sleep much later when I'm dead. And we just got to do it. But with 5, it's not always easy. They all have different personalities, different hobbies, different passions, and so you just got to figure out how to do it.
So that brings me to another topic. Another commonality that you and I have is we both have a passion for hunting.
Yes.
Now, me, growing up in Kansas, got quail hunting, pheasant hunting around us, and in recent decades, some of the best deer hunting in America. It's not that surprising. Plus, a lot of hunters are introduced to the sport by someone in their family. So my dad introduced me to hunting. You grew up in Manhattan. Your dad was not a hunter. Yeah. How in the world did you develop this passion for hunting growing up in your surroundings?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm only here because I can hope to maybe get a governor's tag one day, because I can't seem to draw. That's the only reason I'm here, guys. No, it was interesting. My grandfather on my mother's side, so my maternal grandfather, was a blue-collar electrician from what was then communist Czechoslovakia. And when he came over here and he saw sort of our lifestyle, he recognized both how amazing some of it was, and he also recognized some of the pitfalls. that I've seen from, a lot of my peers growing up, just growing up in that kind of wealth, in that kind of city, with that kind of opulence around. And so my grandfather, from a very young age, had those conversations with my father. And I was like, I'm going to take him over to, again, communist Czechoslovakia in the 80s, and spend 6 weeks there. I spoke the language fluently. They were a big part of my life. So I went over there. I was 5 years old the first time I was there for 6 weeks, and it was basically, there's the woods. I'll see you at dark. It sort of taught me how to shoot a bow, taught me how to shoot an air gun. You couldn't really hunt there because, again, if you weren't somewhere here in the party, you weren't going to be able to do anything, and he was just, a regular guy. But he really started that passion for me in the outdoors. I went to boarding school in central Pennsylvania. A couple guys took me under their wing there. It was an old school kind of place. They had a rifle range on campus. Imagine that today. That'd be like...
Sounds great.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. So just got into it, read every book that there was, and just sort of took off. And I really attribute it to a lot of what's been able to keep me at least somewhat grounded, because it's hard to get. Not that I was an angel. Can't sell that with a straight face. But sort of when you're going to be in a duck blind, when you're going to be in a tree stand at 4 in the morning, it's a little bit harder to do some of the other stuff. And so I want to make sure that that stuff's around for my kids and their kids after them, because every kid I can get off a couch and into the woods. Every kid I get away from a video game and teach them all the things that are lacking, frankly, in most kids' youth today: patience, discipline, perseverance. I mean, all of that stuff can be taught with shooting sports, with the outdoors, and I think it's really important to try to preserve that tradition. So the hard part is it's not that easy to just jump into it. So you have to just be a mentor. So I bring my friends, I bring their kids, and it's like, okay, I realize it's going to be painful for me, but those are some of the sacrifices we got to make. And you can do that. And again, where I live in the People's Republic of New York, this is not exactly, you go upstate, it's fine. But it's such an uncommon thing that people have these preconceived notions of what it is. But not one of those people that I've ever taken out hasn't been like, oh my God, this is so different than what I thought. That was one of the great days of my life. When are we going again?
Yeah.
And this is someone that was, anti-gun, whatever it was that we were doing 2 hours before.
Yeah.
Once you experience it, realize what it actually is, as opposed to what it's been stereotyped as, and what the other side has spent a lot of marketing dollars trying to create, you really realize what a wholesome thing this is. And if you could do that as a family activity, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So many things have distinguished the Trump campaign from prior campaigns and the Trump presidency from prior presidencies.
Oh boy.
So one thing that I think is probably, if people listed what some of the distinguishing aspects, is Twitter. Mm-hmm. When did your dad first get onto Twitter, and what were your thoughts about it? Were you like, this is so cool, my dad's sending messages at 5 a.m., or what were your thoughts when he first started doing that?
I think I've probably had mixed feelings throughout the years. Honestly, I think it's actually great. I think you see the sort of the humor side of him if if people can actually step back and really analyze some of it. But candidly, when I see and what I got to experience firsthand over the last 18 months, and I don't think I was naive to press, having lived the lifestyle that we lived and grew up in, but I was naive to how bad it actually is, and how whether you say something and you sort of leave out the comma, add an exclamation point, things can be so manipulated and so taken out of context, and you sort of include. I always joked, you watch him give a speech, and they'll be, he said this. I'm like, when? Yesterday in Kansas. Wait, I was there. When did he say that? No, he did. No, but I was there. He didn't say that. Well, if you take minute number 1, and you take minute number 14, you take minute number 37, you mix them up and put them in order, yes, he said those words.
Yeah, totally out of context.
But it's so out of context. It's so gross, actually, that the way I looked at it, him doing it direct in 140 characters, 280 is a little different, but in 140 characters, it's so succinct, to the point, and you're playing monkey in the middle with the people who are going to ultimately manipulate what you're saying anyway. So why not go right to the people?
Yeah.
Why not put it out there exactly as you mean it, and let the people decide, as opposed to it was great because 2 weeks ago we had the anniversary of the big win, and I for the first time, because I didn't get to enjoy that night as much. I was probably still just shell-shocked from 18 months of just
So are a lot of people in this room.
Yeah,
too.
just solid fighting and just being out there. I didn't get to enjoy it as much as I would have liked. But this year, and seeing the compilation videos, watching all the pundit well, if we win Pennsylvania, we still have a chance. I'm like, who's we? Like, I thought you were supposed to be the objective. But I mean, it was so flagrant watching these people. I thought the best one was frankly Martha Raddatz, because she was the independent judge, moderator of the second debate. She's there in tears, crying. I mean, one thing that's nice is that people realize they're not even pretending anymore.
Yeah.
They're not even pretending to be objective anymore, which is great, because at least we're being honest for the first time ever. So, it was nice to see. So I love the Twitter aspect of it, because he could say what he's saying, and you can't really mess with that. And, they have to run with it, and they have to try to criticize it, so it just gets it in front of everyone anyway. Yeah. If they just left it alone, it probably wouldn't be nearly as effective.
No, I think that's, and that's also historic, too. Never before has America been able to hear directly what the president is thinking in real time. This is the president typing it with his own thumbs or whatever. I mean, I worked in the Bush administration, and it was a very different operation. And when I was working for Attorney General Ashcroft, and you might have a meeting with the president, and then in that meeting he might say a few words, but then there'd be no, he wouldn't state the conclusion, and then 2 weeks later we'd find out what the president's decision was. But you never know what the president's thinking. Yeah. With your dad, we get to see what he's thinking, and I think it's just amazing. It's so transparent. People talk about transparency. A lot of people on the left talk about transparency too, for good reason. But your dad is the most transparent president ever.
100%. And
so you brought up the media too. So this is as Republicans, conservatives, we often gripe about the media. Myself, as someone who's been a conservative. Who pushes on the issues for a long time in Kansas, people know where I stand, and the editorial pages hate me at all the major papers. But I will say that there's a difference. Usually the reporters in Kansas, like the ones here tonight, are usually very fair and balanced. We'll cover both sides. So at least I can, on the news page, I can count on getting a fair shake. Definitely not getting a fair shake on the editorial page. Mm-hmm. With your dad, it seems like even the news, it just seems like there is so much aggression in so many papers against him. What do you attribute that to, and what do you think about it?
Listen, I think you see it not just media. I think even from establishment politicians, even on his side. I think he's so unique in that he's perhaps opened the door for other people to say, wait a minute, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And I think they see that as a real threat to the society that they've established. When I look at a lot of the mainstream politicians and say, I don't see them frankly being able to be all that successful anywhere else. And they've created, they've created, this little area where they can be the boss, where they can have the power, where they can prevent everyone else from doing anything, and they own that. And there was never any accountability. If they lost, fine, we go become a consultant again, we'll be back in the next cycle. The zip codes around D.C., this is what I spoke about, because I go to Middle America and places like that. I do think you're right. You get more of a fair shot because I think the people are more reasonable. Mm-hmm. The problem is for them to advance in their careers, they have to sort of go further that way to be able to move up into a different market or a bigger market eventually. But you see that throughout. And with him, it's actually, to me, it's a benefit. Because I still think that the average American is still a very rational individual. And when you overplay your hand so far and so extreme, and you're not going with sort of the Occam's razor approach of like, okay, there's a 99% chance that he meant this. We're going to say it's the 0.02% chance he meant this, and that's what we're going with, and we're going to sell it to you. Like, people turn that on, they go, not buying it. So you're taking the most powerful man in the world, and you're actually making him an underdog in many respects. And I think, I think it's just going to backfire on him. But I don't know that there's a solution for it because it is so far gone, and I think it's a problem, frankly, on both sides. So from the media standpoint, I think that's the same thing from the political standpoint. People have gotten very cush and cozy lifestyles there. We talked about it, on the campaign. The richest zip codes in the United States are all popping around D.C. because everyone's doing this for their friend, and they get this, and they do it. Yeah. So now they see someone who's doesn't care, doesn't need the job, doesn't need their money, and it's a real threat. Understandably so. They've spent their entire careers building that power base, and so I don't necessarily begrudge them that, but as an American, as a father of five, as a patriot, it's a problem. And I think he has the ability and the chance to actually really recenter a lot of that, and probably create opportunity for other people who would have not ever even thought about going into that line of work and say, wait a second, I've actually accomplished these things in real life. Let's have one of these guys who's done it in practice, not just theory. Because there's a lot more theory than practice in D.C.
So I can't remember when I saw this, and some of you in the audience probably have seen this too. There's an old video of your dad, I think maybe from 1989 or 1988. He's asked by someone, I don't know, was it Oprah? He was asked by someone, and he was about your age at that time, and he was asked, would you ever run for president? And I can't remember exactly what his answer was, but it wasn't no, never. It was, well, yeah, maybe. So I assume, just tell us, when did you first remember your dad ever talking about running for president? And when did you, and when did you think he actually means it?
Well, I remember that video because it was so interesting when people were like, well, these people have created Trump. I was like, watch the Oprah thing from 80. It's literally the same talking points in terms of what he was seeing going on. And so I think I've seen his frustration build really over the decades. And every time it's like, man, you just got more of the same broken promise after broken promise. Here's what I'm going to sell you a bill of goods. We're going to deliver something totally different. No one's ever held accountable. He obviously started getting more vocal in the 2000s. And if you haven't noticed, the one thing about him is, he'll get vocal, he'll throw some stones, but eventually he's also the kind of guy that says, okay, I've done that. Now I got to step up. Win, lose, or draw, I got to step up and do it, because unlike so many, he's not just a talker, he's a man of action. And I think that was important. And so he'd been complaining about it enough, he's been talking from the sidelines, he's been saying enough, and then eventually he said, okay, I've done enough of that, I got to put my hat in the ring, and he did something pretty amazing. I mean, I look at it, I think it has to be probably the greatest political upset maybe ever. I can't think of something, when you think about it, you're going up against the largest political machine ever. This thing's been building for 30 years. I mean, this is not, against a media that's, let's call it, other than Sean Hannity, basically 99%, on the other side. And I mean, to be able to do that, and to go in, without the experience, without this, I mean, that takes guts. There's a better word for it, but I shouldn't say that here. And I think we need more people that have those kind of principles, those kind of guts. To get in there and do those things. Well,
his presidency is so historic for so many reasons. One is this come from behind, although I don't think he was ever behind. I think the modeling of the polls was wrong from the beginning.
100%.
Yeah, but this surprise victory, we'll call it that. But he's also historic in the sense that every president in American history before your father was either a politician or a general. Mm-hmm. Every single one. He is the first true outsider to government or an entity of government like the military. Yeah. Did you guys ever talk about that when the campaign was going on?
There wasn't time. I'd love to say, well, no, we had the very cerebral. It wasn't that. Like what I did on the campaign, it's like, where's he? He's there. Okay, then I'm going somewhere else. Because the only thing I realized was that if you're in the same room as him, there's a vacuum and you're just not going to be effective. So I just split up and did that, but it was interesting throughout. And I think you're right. I don't know that he was ever really behind, but on paper, anyone would have put it as a big thing. But I got to see that, and I got to see it around the country. It was interesting, because I went to all these little small venues, the places that didn't make sense for him to go, and just speaking to real Americans. You got so many people you had the people that showed up, wearing their MAGA hats and sweatshirts and Trump down go, but you had an equal, if not greater, number of people that would come up to me, not at a place where they're coming to see me speak, but at the gas station in between stops, and be like, "You guys are doing a great job. Keep going." Yeah. They wouldn't even say it out loud. No, but I mean it in a serious sense, because they were pigeonholed into a narrative, created by others. If you're a Trump supporter, you're X, Y, Z, and we saw it. What was really fascinating was when we did our polling. Yeah. If we did online polling versus telephone polling to the same sample set, right? It's big sample sets. Statistics would dictate you get virtually the same answer, right? Telephone was 15 points lower across the board, across the country, than the online stuff.
Yeah, it's the perceived response.
Because people, phenomenon. If they weren't sure where you were coming from, we're writing in Bernie. Yeah, right. So we started asking the question. We're like, we couldn't explain the difference. So we said, who's your neighbor voting for? Oh yeah, that guy's voting for Trump. So basically the person that's, let's call it exactly like you, that guy was definitely a Trump voter. I'm not necessarily going to go out there. I'm writing in Bozo the Clown for all I know. And once you started asking that question, it just came together. And so, I felt so good because you could see the enthusiasm gap. I mean, there were literally markets where, I'd have to ask the guys because, our opponent, the vice presidential opponent, was in the market where I'm speaking the day before, and they're like, "You drew 6 times more than." I'm like, do they realize it's junior? I was like, I don't want to be selling a bill of goods that, to make the junior really small print, we can trick them in there. I don't want that. It's not a good plan. You could see the enthusiasm gap when he was speaking to 10, 15, 20, 25,000 people 6 times a day at times. He filled up a stadium in Michigan, where we weren't supposed to be, obviously, because you can't possibly win that, with 30,000 people at 1 a.m. on election day. That's different, and it was great because watching the TV that day, they go, well, it's going to be much tighter because Hillary Clinton drew 30,000 people together. No. Hillary Clinton, Bon Jovi, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Bruce. I'd listen to her for a few minutes to hear some of those guys speak. I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't. But other people would. But so trying to equate those two things. So it was, the enthusiasm gap was incredible, and you could just see it. I mean, I'd never maybe been a political junkie on the sidelines, but experiencing that going into these markets. When I went to, I think Keith was with me a couple of these places. You go to New Hampshire in February, it's 30 degrees out and substantially colder, and there's someone waiting in line. For 5 hours. You met in New Hampshire that time.
Yeah, that's right. It was snowing. And
it's snowing in New Hampshire. That guy's waiting to hear a politician speak for half an hour. For 5 hours on his weekend, I go, that person's showing up to vote.
And I remember looking at the audiences in the Manchester, New Hampshire speaking event that evening, and that arena was packed. And I was looking around at, I've been to a lot of political events, and so I'm looking at just the audience. And, there's this... A Republican crowd looks very different than a Democrat crowd, and there's certain, average age you kind of recognize, and just the way people are dressed and things. And I was looking at that crowd, and I'm thinking, this does not look like your average Republican audience. There are people here who the guy who's got the long hair and the rock T-shirt and the, it's not the T-shirt on that thing, but you're thinking these are probably people who are not voters every 2 years. There are some people here who are not normal political junkies. They came here to see your dad. And that got me thinking, there's going to be something really interesting happening in this campaign. You're getting a lot of people who are not regular voters who aren't getting called by the pollsters because the pollsters only call you if you were a previous voter.
Yeah, it was a whole different, I think you reached out to, hey, whether it was organized labor, some of these, blue collar, union Democrats, they've been Democrats for 4 generations, and they're saying, wait a minute. Who's done more with union labor than Trump? It's you were able to breach so many boundaries. I mean, there's those people that came up to me also that, again, didn't fit the narrative created, which is, the old angry white guy. He's the only guy doing it. Because I got to see it, because we were in all these places. I mean, there were a couple of people that come up to me I want to talk to you. I'm like, oh, man, I'm getting slapped. Because I did the same stereotype. It was okay, female dreadlocks in Denver airport. It's I'm in trouble. and it's and then they tell you, hey, we're voting for you. There's so many of those stories that you just you never would have thought about it. And yet these were just people, frankly, they've been just fed up being lied to. Yeah. They just wanted someone who's going to go in there and break things up. I mean, you had plenty of people that were undecided between Trump and Bernie. Yeah. So it wasn't even necessarily always about political ideology, but about being able to have someone in there who's going to teach everyone down there a little bit of a lesson and make a statement that way. And I think that was important.
So some of you who, I used to have a radio show in town, have heard me say this theory, and I'm just going to throw this out for you. My theory is if you go back to every presidential election in the television age, so basically back to Kennedy versus Nixon, the person who wins, and this holds true for every single election, the person who won that election is the person that the average man or woman would like to sit down and have a beer with. Mm-hmm. If you go back, you do every single one, and you compare the personalities of the two people, it is always the guy who they would rather have a beer with. And I said, according to my theory, Donald Trump is not only going to win, he's going to win big, because Trump versus Hillary, there's no way he loses that contest. So Your dad has so many amazing elements. Okay, so my staff is if you look at the official schedule, we're supposed to be.
One more question,
yeah,
2 minutes.
But I mean, do you guys have like 10 more minutes? Can we do a few more? Yeah, okay. Because I haven't even gotten to the audience questions yet, so we might go a little bit, 10 minutes extra. Okay, so, this is interesting. Do the president's tweets hurt or help his attempts to get legislation done, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think when I would imagine most of the time it's still, he's talking common sense, he's talking pragmatism, he's talking so many of those things that just don't exist in D.C., and I think if he can infuse some common sense back there, it's important. So I think people have to see that he is fighting for these things, and if he's not just going to do the things for optics, to be able to say, well, okay, like people have to do these things because they're the right thing to do, not because they're being slighted this way, not because they're doing a party line thing, not because they're trying to prove a point and get invited to some tour to have someone kiss your butt. That's what the system has become. So I think he's got to be himself, and he's always going to be true to himself. So I think people see that, and I think, again, as it relates to the average American, I think that's important because it has been missing for so long.
Well, and I think also if there's a legislator who's on the fence and suddenly Trump is tweeting about
you probably don't want to be on the wrong side of that.
You don't want to be on the wrong side of that tweet. Okay, what is the number one threat to the United States or to the world?
Wow. Obviously there's numerous, but candidly, for me, as an American, it's the notion of sort of being able to speak your mind freely. I mean, when I look at both the First and Second Amendments and the attacks, on them, we're all for free speech, but you can't say anything about Jesus Christ. You can't say anything that's a conservative value. You can't talk about even work ethic as like a sort of bohemian value in this country. Like what happened with Amy Wax as like a law professor.
You're not making a comment against Bohemians, are
No.
you? Okay,
no.
yeah, I just want to check.
Yes, because that would be terrible.
That would be bad,
But I saw it, just at my alma mater, and I don't know what Amy Wax said at University of Pennsylvania. I saw this because it was just my alma mater. Work hard, respect your boss, have kids after you get married, try to do your best to stay married for, not rocket science. Okay, things that basically would have been common sense values and virtues forever. The values that probably allowed us to become, the dominant force in the world. And now that's terrible, and it's people. I turn on the TV, it's like we've lost our minds. We are more concerned about the feelings of someone in a far-off land who hates our religion, hates our freedoms, hates everything about us. If that person could push a button and make America, wipe it off the face of the earth, they would. And we're more concerned about their feelings than the safety and well-being of our own kids and grandkids. It's mind-boggling. And, I think with him in there, I think you actually know you have someone who actually cares about Americans. And, putting their well-being, their safety, their jobs first, rather than having that person, who I've met hundreds of, living in middle America, throughout the campaign, that person's watched their American dream get shipped abroad because the excessive regulation has made it impossible for business to, function. And so when I look, they say Trump has, not only slashed many of the 18,000 regulations put in, but has not implemented a new one at all. Look what's going on.
Yeah.
You see, the market has hit, 37 all-time highs because it's common sense. If people think the environment's going to enable them to do that, consumer confidence is everything.
Yep.
And that's going to drive success. You throw in some tax reform. You allow companies to bring back the $4 to $6 trillion that's being offshored. That's incredible stuff, which is why the tax reform side is so important. So, all of these things add up, but that common sense is just gone. So, to really answer your question, I think that the notion that we have to live by a PC norm established by someone that's so detached from real hard-working Americans, rather than speak common sense, that's a huge threat.
I agree. How did you meet your lovely and caring wife?
We met through friends, in New York City. It's sort of a long story. I don't know if this was one for TV, but we met amazingly enough in New York City. We'd grown up with similar friends that I'd never met because I would have definitely blown it way earlier. And it's been an interesting time ever since.
If you and your dad and brother, I'm going to add and sister too, played a game of Monopoly,
Oh, it'd get ugly.
who would win?
Oh, it'd be ugly. I'm not sure anyone would survive, let alone win. So those are personalities you may not want to pit up against each other just yet. But obviously me.
This is from Drew, who says he's the youngest person here at age 17. Is America great again yet?
We're working on it. He's draining the swamp, but the swamp has teeth. The swamp isn't going to make it easy. To our conversation earlier, I mean, they've spent their lives creating this little environment that works for them and doesn't work for the people anymore. They're not just going to give that up. And so we got to fight. We got to keep putting people in there who are going to back his agenda. And I think if you do that, I think you have an incredible chance of making all of those things happen. I mean, listen, I think if you look at the numbers, if you look at what's going on, again, whether you talk about unemployment numbers being the lowest in 17 years, when you talk about jobless numbers, 45 years, when you talk about creating $5 trillion in the economy in 9 months, when you talk about 37 all-time high stock market, how's your 401k doing? These are real things, and they really are. Now, you don't hear about them. No one's going to give them the credit for that, but there's other presidents that did a great job that also didn't get the credit, like Reagan. Yeah. When you look at the similarities, it's they're never going to do it, but that's why we feel the need to actually go out and actually say those things. Yep. Because they'll say, well, he misplaced a comma in a tweet. It's terrible. It's the worst thing in the world. Well, I don't know. I'm more concerned about my 401k. I'm more concerned about my kids' future than I am about some of those things. So I think if you focused on those things, certainly off to one heck of a start.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm told one more question. What is the best advice your father gave you?
You have to love what you do. It sounds trite, it sounds basic, but if you don't love what it is that you're going to do, life's too short to be miserable the whole time. And if you don't love it, you're never gonna excel at it. You used to always say this to me: if we're going to go in the business, you better do it well, because I'll fire you like a dog if you don't. And it was before The Apprentice, and he meant it. He was never going to subsidize our careers at the expense of the guys that worked for him for 30 years. It wasn't going to be that way. So he's like, you got to make sure that you do it, because I saw this. I've gone to Wharton, right? You have so many guys that says I graduated in 2000, so everyone wanted to be an investment banker. Mm-hmm. You know who the guys who succeeded were? Not necessarily the guys who were smarter, the guys that really wanted to do it. Because guess what? When you're working your 56 straight day, 24 hours a day, they were fine doing it because they loved it. It's the guy that did that job because he says, well, I'm going to make a lot more money doing that job. Yeah, he was miserable for 3 years, and then he left. Yeah. So he didn't get the sort of the longer term perks because he barely paid his dues. So you got to really kind of figure out what it is that you actually want to do in life and pursue that, because anything else, it's just never going to work. It's always going to be a shortchanged experience.
Very wise words. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming to Kansas.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thanks, man.